Good morning Year 5 and welcome back to another English lesson. So today we're going to carry on with our diary entry planning and hopefully get started writing. But before we begin, I'd like you to pause the video and write the date and the LO in your English books. So the date is Wednesday the 24th of February 2021 and the learning objective is to start writing my diary entry. So please pause the video now and do that nice and neatly in your English books. Okay, and as you can see, I've got the signs of success on the screen. So quickly have a look at those to know how to be successful in today's English lesson. Okay, so make sure today you have your planning sheet like this. You have your storyboard and your vocabulary maps that you did yesterday. And we're going to use those to write the first half of our diary entry. And make sure today you don't go beyond the first half and do not rush to the end. Okay, that's really important that we do one part at a time to make sure we're producing quality work. Okay, so as I said, we're just going to be writing our first half of our diary entry today. So if you have chosen to write your diary entry from Tony's perspective, the child in our story, for example, this could include arriving at Grandpa's, finding the photograph and cart, and beginning your adventure with Grandpa. And then in the next lesson, we'll continue the second half of the story where we talk more in depth about the adventure. So these are some 3 points that you could talk about in the first half of your diary entry. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of live modelling now so you can see my thought process as I start to write Tony's diary entry. If you haven't chose to write from Tony's perspective, then go forward in the video to see your chosen character's perspective and how I write the diary entry. Okay, so only watch this part of the video if you're going to write your diary entry from Tony's perspective. Okay, so I'm going to start thinking about how I can start my diary entry from Tony's perspective. And as you remember, he had an amazing experience of an adventure with his grandpa, and we need to take it back to the start. So I'm going to start by saying, I cannot believe I'm writing this. Today was the most amazing day of my whole entire life. Full stop. Okay, so I've got the 16th of May 2017, and I've got Dear Diary, I cannot believe I'm writing this, but today was the most amazing day of my whole entire life. And now I need to think about how it started, so I'm going to say, it all began this morning when Dad chaotically dropped me off to Grandpa's house. Okay, so I've got, Dear Diary, I cannot believe I'm writing this, but today was the most amazing day of my whole entire life. It all began this morning when Dad chaotically dropped me off to Grandpa's house. So I've used chaotically because that describes someone who's stressed, and as you can remember, Dad was quite stressed when he dropped Tony off to Grandpa's house. Okay, now I'm going to talk a bit about Tony's feelings of how he felt being dropped off at Grandpa's house that morning. So I'm going to say, at the time, I felt neglected and disappointed. As I was looking forward to spending the whole Saturday with Dad, now I need to talk about what I was looking forward to. So I could say playing games and building dens. Full stop. So far I've got, Dear Diary, I cannot believe I'm writing this, but today was the most amazing day of my whole entire life. It all began this morning when Dad chaotically dropped me off to Grandpa's house. At the time, I felt neglected and disappointed as I was looking forward to spending the whole Saturday with Dad, playing games and building dens. And I'm going to end this first paragraph by saying, little did I know what was in store for me. Okay, so we've got a finishing line that sort of implies that something is about to happen in the next part of our diary. So I'm just going to make that a bit smaller so I can fit some more in. Okay, let's go new paragraph. So I'm going to talk more about now when I arrived at Grandpa's house and how it led me to going on the adventure. So I'm going to say, I sat on a cardboard box in Grandpa's garage. And then I'm going to talk about my teddy. So I'm going to put with Ted, give him a capital T because it's his name maybe. And then I'm going to say feeling glum whilst Grandpa cut the grass. As you can remember, he sat on that box and he was looking a bit sad that he'd just been dropped off by his dad for the day rather than spending the day with his dad having fun. So I said, I sat on a cardboard box in Grandpa's garage with Ted, feeling glum whilst Grandpa cut the grass. I'm going to say he left me no choice but to explore the garage. Okay, so as you can remember, he started looking around and he spotted something, didn't he? So I'm going to say, as I began looking around, I spotted something red and shiny on the top shelf. Okay, what did he do next? Can you remember? So I'm going to put excitedly. I started, space, piling dusty boxes on top of one another so I could reach it until ... it all toppled down on me. And maybe I could talk a bit more about how this felt. So I could put it all toppled down on me and I hit the cold concrete floor with a thump. Okay, we're getting somewhere now. So I'm going to think of a way to sort of finish off this paragraph. So I need to talk about how the cart fell with me on the ground, and that is how it all began. So I'm going to say, luckily, the shiny red thing, because he doesn't know what it is yet, red thing landed with me, which was in fact a ruby red cart. With a matching helmet. And then I'm going to talk about the photograph and move on to the last paragraph. I'm going to say, inside the glistening cart was a grubby photograph of Grandpa and Dad sat in the exact cart, so it must have been Dad's. Okay, so I'm just going to read through what we have so far, and I've moved the pictures out of the way so we have enough room to write the last paragraph of our first half. So I've got 16th of May 2017. Dear Diary, I cannot believe I'm writing this, but today was the most amazing day of my whole entire life. It all began this morning when Dad chaotically dropped me off to Grandpa's house. At the time, I felt neglected and disappointed, as I was looking forward to spending the whole Saturday with Dad, playing games and building dens. Little did I know what was in store for me. I sat on a cardboard box in Grandpa's garage with Ted, feeling glum whilst Grandpa cut the grass. He left me no choice but to explore the garage. As I began looking around, I spotted something red and shiny on the top shelf. Excitedly, I started piling dusty boxes on top of one another so I could reach it until it all toppled down on me and I hit the cold concrete floor with a thump. Luckily, the shiny red thing landed with me, which was in fact a ruby red cart with a matching helmet. Inside the glistening cart was a grubby photograph of Grandpa and Dad sat in the exact cart. I need to change that to cart. So it must have been Dad's. Okay, I'm quite happy with that so far. I'm just going to change that to cart, not card, and then we can write our last paragraph. So as we're writing the first half, our last paragraph needs to indicate that an adventure is going to take place. So I need to think about how Grandpa came to taking Tony out on the cart. And if you remember from the video, when Tony falls onto the floor, the helmet rolls towards Grandpa when he's cutting the grass. So I'm going to talk about that and how that led to them going out on the cart for the day. So I'm going to say, as the striking red helmet rolled towards Grandpa, I need to talk a bit more about the setting. So on the freshly cut grass, he quickly turned off the lawnmower and looked up at me in astonishment. Okay, so we need to think about now how Grandpa felt about this cart and how it led them to the adventure. So I'm going to say, with a smile on his face, he said, you know that wagon used to be your dad's? Because that's what he said in the video. He said, what say we take it out for a spin? Okay, I'm going to finish my first half of my diary entry with a finishing sentence. So I'm going to say, I nodded in anticipation and I'm going to comma, and you won't believe what happened next. Okay, I think I've got the first half of my diary entry and I'm quite happy with it. So let's just read it back one more time and think about what we've done together. So 16th of May 2017, Dear Diary, I cannot believe I'm writing this, but today was the most amazing day of my whole entire life. It all began this morning when Dad chaotically dropped me off to Grandpa's house. At the time, I felt neglected and disappointed as I was looking forward to spending the whole Saturday with Dad, playing games and building dens. Little did I know what was in store for me. I sat on a cardboard box in Grandpa's garage with Ted, feeling glum whilst Grandpa cut the grass. He left me no choice but to explore the garage. As I began looking around, I spotted something red and shiny on the top shelf. Excitedly, I started piling dusty boxes on top of one another so I could reach it until it all toppled down on me and I hit the cold concrete floor with a thump. Luckily, the shiny red thing landed with me, which was in fact a ruby red cart with a matching helmet. Inside the glistening cart was a grubby photograph of Grandpa and Dad sat in the exact cart, so it must have been Dad's. As the striking red helmet rolled towards Grandpa on the freshly cut grass, he quickly turned off the lawnmower and looked up at me in astonishment. With a smile on his face, he said, You know that wagon used to be your dad's. What say we take it out for a spin? I nodded in anticipation, and you won't believe what happened next. Okay, so that is just one example of what we could talk about when we write the first half of our diary entry from Tony's perspective. So we've got the introduction paragraph where we talk about how it started. Then we've got a bit more in depth of how it took place. So we've got him finding the car and then it rolling towards Grandpa. And then we've got the last paragraph, which talks about what is about to happen next. As we say, you won't believe what happened next. So you could do something like this. You could use different sentences and vocabulary. And this is just an example. You could create something even better than this yourselves. Okay, so now that I've modelled an example of how we write the diary entry, the first half of the diary entry from Tony's perspective, I would like you to have a go. So you can use your planning sheet, your vocabulary mind map and your storyboard. And as I said, you could talk about arriving at Grandpa's, finding the photograph and cart, and beginning your adventure with Grandpa. And remember, do not go too far as we're going to carry this on tomorrow, and then that is when you will talk more in depth about the adventure. So pause the video now. You can use my example to help you, but I'd like you to come up with your own ideas and sentences. And once you've done this, you can purple pen your work or just use a different coloured pen at home and upgrade your vocabulary using your mind map. So pause the video and make sure you spend time on this to make sure you're producing quality work, okay? We don't want to rush it as we want to share our final pieces on Friday and feel really proud that we've worked hard on this. So as I said, we're doing the first half of our diary entry and I've given you some examples of what you could include. Okay, so pause the video and have a go at that now. And remember, you can message me on Class Dojo if you have any questions. Okay, so for those of you that have chose to write your diary entry from Grandpa's perspective, as we're writing the first half of the diary entry, here are some things you could include. So you could talk about your son dropping Tony off for the day, cutting the grass and seeing Tony discover the photograph, car and helmet in your garage. And then you could start talking about deciding to take Tony on an adventure. So as I said, we're going to do the first half. So I'm going to model now what you could include in your first half of your diary entry from Grandpa's perspective. So as you can see, I've got the date in the top right corner and I start my diary entry with Dear Diary. Okay, so to start my diary entry from Grandpa's perspective, I'm going to take it right back to the beginning of that morning before Tony arrived. So as you can see in the video, it's a nice sunny day and I'm going to think about what Grandpa would have normally been doing on a day like this. So I'm going to start by saying it was a beautiful Saturday morning. Saturday with a capital S. Just going to make that a bit smaller so we've got enough for the rest to fit in. Okay. So it was a beautiful Saturday morning. The sun was gleaming and the birds were chirping. Full stop. Okay, I'm happy with that so far. Now I'm going to take it back to the first part of Grandpa's day. So I'm going to say, I woke up with a spring in my step. I'm going to say, and decided to give the house a spring clean, cut the grass, and attempt to declutter the muddled garage. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about how this was my plan until I got the phone call from my son. So I'm going to call the son Andy, just so I have a name. I'm going to say, unexpectedly, my son Andy called me. My son Andy frantically called me. That means like in a panic. Asking if I could have Tony for the day. I'm going to put an exclamation mark to emphasize his surprise that this is how his day has changed. So I'm going to say, I didn't much choice. My productive Saturday plans were ruined. But I was excited to spend time with my youngest grandson. Full stop. Okay. So far we have, Dear Diary. It was a beautiful Saturday morning. The sun was gleaming and the birds were chirping. I woke up with a spring in my step and decided to give the house a spring clean, cut the grass and attempt to declutter the muddled garage. Unexpectedly, my son Andy frantically called me asking if I could have Tony for the day. I didn't have much choice. My productive Saturday plans were ruined, but I was excited to spend time with my youngest grandson. Okay, what could we talk about next? I'm going to talk about now when they arrived. So I'm going to say when they arrived, I could tell Andy was preoccupied, and that means when your mind is busy. As he quickly dumped Tony's belongings on me and rushed off, looking at his phone in stress. Okay, I'm going to do a finishing line for this paragraph and then move on to the next one. So I'm going to say, I didn't ask what was bothering him. I've learned that lesson before. So we're keeping it nice and informal, as if someone was writing this in their personal private diary. Okay, now I'm going to start a new paragraph about the start of their adventure and what it was like when Tony was left on his own at Grandpa's house. So as you can remember, he'd planned to cut the grass, so I'm going to say, I continued cutting the grass whilst Tony played with his teddy in the garage. I'm going to say, all of a sudden, I spot Andy's ancient red helmet. Or I spotted Andy's ancient red helmet. Because as you can remember, and you can see in this picture here, as Tony fell in the garage, the helmet rolled towards Grandpa on the grass. So I'm going to say, I looked in the garage and Tony had managed to take a fall. And say already to emphasise that he hadn't been there long. Tony had already taken a fall as he led, surrounded by boxes and clutter. Okay, now I'm going to keep it informal and Grandpa's going to say, I knew I needed to tidy it. Okay, so I'm going to say, I rushed over to see if he was okay and realised he was next to Andy's ruby red cart holding a dusty photograph of me and my boy back in the day. Okay, I'm going to do a finishing sentence to finish my first half of my diary entry. I'm going to say, I experienced an overwhelming sense of nostalgia And nostalgia means when you sort of reminisce on the past, you think of memories that you had throughout your life. And decided to abandon my jobs and take Tony out on an adventure. Boy, was he in for a ride! Exclamation mark. Okay, let's have a look at what we've got so far. Sorry if there is any spelling mistakes, as I'm doing this quite quickly to show you how we write our first half. So, dear diary, it was a beautiful Saturday morning. The sun was gleaming and the birds were chirping. I woke up with a spring in my step and decided to give the house a spring clean, cut the grass, and attempt to declutter the muddled garage. Unexpectedly, my son Andy frantically called me asking if I could have Tony for the day. I didn't have much choice. My productive Saturday plans were ruined, but I was excited to spend time with my youngest grandson. When they arrived, I could tell Andy was preoccupied, as he quickly dumped Tony's belongings on me and rushed off, looking at his phone in stress. I didn't ask what was bothering him. I've learned that lesson before. I continued cutting the grass whilst Tony played with his teddy in the garage. All of a sudden, I spotted Andy's ancient red helmet. I looked in the garage and Tony had already taken a fall as he led surrounded by boxes and clutter. I knew I needed to tidy it. I rushed over to see if he was okay and realised he was next to Andy's ruby red car, holding a dusty photograph of me and my boy back in the day. I experienced an overwhelming sense of nostalgia and decided to abandon my jobs and take Tony out on an adventure. Boy, was he in for a ride. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. So, as I said, you're going to now have a go at this. And remember, it's just the first half. And if you're writing it from Grandpa's perspective, you could talk about your son dropping Tony off for the day, cutting the grass and seeing Tony discover the photograph, cart and helmet, and deciding to take Tony on an adventure. And you just stop there, as we'll carry on tomorrow and talk about the rest of the adventure in depth. So pause the video and have a go at this now, and then come back and see what you need to do next. Okay, so once you've done this, you need to purple pen your work or use a different coloured pen, looking to upgrade your vocabulary using your mind map. So get your mind map from the other day and think about what words you could upgrade to make it even better. Okay, so today you're going to write your first half of your diary entry. And if you have chosen to write this from Dad's perspective, you could include feeling stressed and needing to drop Tony off to Grandpa's house with short notice, feeling bad about leaving him there, and driving somewhere. That could be work, to see friends, or going shopping. Okay, so I'm going to model an example of what you could talk about in the first half of your diary entry. And remember, we're going to carry this on tomorrow, and that is when you'll talk about what you did whilst you were gone, coming back to find them being dirty, and then going on an adventure to the moon. So today you're just doing the first half, and then we'll carry on tomorrow and talk a bit more about the rest of the story. So, okay, so I'm going to start my diary entry with the date, which I've chose the 16th of May 2017, and I'm going to use Dear Diary as always. So I'm going to give a bit of context about Dad's situation and why he might be stressed, and then talk about how the day started. So I'm going to say, after a hectic week at work, I woke up on Saturday morning looking forward to a day of ultimate relaxation. Okay, so I've sort of introduced that the dad of Tony has had a bit of a stressful week at work and is ready to relax on the weekend. And then I'm going to talk about how his day changed for the worse. So I'm going to say, at 9 a.m, I answered the dreaded phone call. Work again. use an exclamation mark to emphasize how unhappy he is about being called by work on the weekend. I'm going to say they needed me to cover, and of course I said yes. Sometimes I wish I wasn't so reliable. Okay, now I'm going to talk a bit more about his situation with Tony and how he feels about having to drop Tony at Grandpa's for the day. So I'm going to say I looked at Tony in guilt, rang his trusty grandpa, and quickly stuffed some of his belongings in a rucksack. So from that you kind of get the gist that it was a stressful situation. He quickly grabbed all of Tony's things and rushed off to Grandpa's. On the car journey to Grandpa's, I felt awful. Am I a bad parent? Sort of a rhetorical question used in informal language. I knew I could rely on my dad to entertain him, even if it does involve gardening. As we've seen in the video, Grandpa wanted to cut the grass and Tony felt bored. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that the dad knows that most of the time the grandpa is gardening, and even if Tony gets involved in that, he's happy that he's somewhere where he's safe and looked after. Okay, what should I say next? So I'm going to talk about arriving now. So we finally arrived, and I didn't even have time to catch up with my dad. I was already late from trying to get Tony, capital T, dressed and out of the door. After a quick turnaround, I managed to speed to the office and face the chaos. Hopefully, Tony will have a day filled of fun and forgive me for having to leave him. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that introduction to our diary, and I would say that is the first half, as Dad isn't seen much in the clip. So let's read it back once together and check we're happy. So the 16th of May 2017, Dear Diary, after a hectic week at work, I woke up on Saturday morning looking forward to a day of ultimate relaxation. At 9 a.m, I answered the dreaded phone call, work again. They needed me to cover, and of course I said yes. Sometimes I wish I wasn't so reliable. I looked at Tony in guilt, rang his trusty grandpa, and quickly stuffed some of his belongings in a rucksack. On the car journey to Grandpa's, I felt awful. Am I a bad parent? I knew I could rely on my dad to entertain him, even if it does involve gardening. We finally arrived and I didn't even have time to catch up with my dad. I was already late from trying to get Tony dressed and out of the door. After a quick turnaround, I managed to speed to the office and face the chaos. Hopefully Tony will have a day filled with fun and forgive me for having to leave him. Okay, I'm happy with that, and then tomorrow, okay, I'm quite happy with that. And then tomorrow we can carry on and talk about how Dad felt when he got back to the house and saw his red car again for the first time. So I would like you guys who have chosen to write your diary entry from Dad's perspective to have a go now. And remember, you're just writing your first half, so that could include dropping Tony off, feeling bad about leaving him there, and then driving somewhere else. So pause the video and use all of your notes and planning to have a go at writing the first half of your diary entry. And once you've done that, come back to the video to see what you need to do next. Okay, so once you've done that, I'd like you to read back through your work, purple pen it and upgrade any vocabulary you can using your mind map. Okay. Okay, well done Year 5 for writing the first half of your diary entry. I'd love you all to post them on Class Dojo so I can see how amazing they are so far. And I look forward to seeing them again on Friday. Okay, so I hope you've all enjoyed writing the first half of your diary entry, and I'll see you again tomorrow to finish them off. Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.